Few modern political figures provoke as much fascination, admiration, criticism, and psychological curiosity as Donald Trump. For decades, he has dominated headlines, first as a real estate developer, then as a television personality, and eventually as the 45th President of the United States. But beneath the politics and media drama lies a deeper question. What psychological forces shape a personality capable of commanding such intense attention? Psychologists often begin by examining persona, the public identity a person constructs. The concept was famously explored by Carl Jung, who described the persona as the mask individuals present to the world. In Trump's case, that mask appears deliberate and consistent. Confidence, dominance, certainty. These traits have defined his communication style for decades. In interviews, speeches, and debates, he frequently speaks with absolute certainty, rarely acknowledging doubt. From a psychological perspective, this style signals high dominance signaling, a behavior pattern often used by leaders seeking authority. Dominance signaling is common in competitive environments such as business and politics. The message is simple: I am strong. I am confident. Follow me. But dominance alone does not explain Trump's psychological appeal. Another factor is narrative control. Throughout his career, Trump has carefully cultivated a story about himself. The image of a bold dealmaker who wins against the odds. Humans are naturally drawn to clear narratives. Psychologically, stories simplify complex realities into understandable heroes and villains. Trump's messaging often follows this pattern. There are problems, there are enemies, and there is a strong leader who will fix them. Whether supporters view this narrative as empowering or critics view it as oversimplified, its psychological effectiveness is undeniable. Because at the deepest level, people do not simply vote for policies. They respond to stories about identity, power, and belonging. And few modern politicians have crafted a persona as psychologically distinctive as Donald Trump. To understand the psychology of Donald Trump, researchers often examine personality traits. One widely studied model in psychology is the Big Five personality framework. This model measures 5 dimensions: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. Although only clinical assessment can determine precise scores, many psychologists have analyzed Trump's public behavior through this framework. One trait appears particularly prominent: extroversion. Trump displays high energy in social situations, frequent public communication, and a strong desire for attention. Extrovert individuals tend to thrive in environments involving competition, leadership, and public engagement. Another trait often discussed is low agreeableness. Agreeableness reflects cooperation, empathy, and conflict avoidance. Trump's confrontational communication style, particularly on social media and political stages, suggests a willingness to engage in conflict rather than avoid it. In many professions, low agreeableness can be a disadvantage. But in highly competitive fields like politics or business, it can sometimes function as a strategic asset. Then there is the question of narcissistic traits. Some psychologists have argued that Trump exhibits characteristics associated with narcissism, such as strong self-confidence, sensitivity to criticism, and a desire for admiration. However, it is important to distinguish between narcissistic personality traits and a clinical diagnosis. Many successful leaders throughout history have demonstrated narcissistic traits without meeting clinical criteria for a disorder. In leadership psychology, a certain level of narcissism can actually drive ambition, resilience, and vision. But when taken to extremes, it can also create conflict and polarization. This dual nature makes the psychology of leadership both fascinating and complicated, and Donald Trump may represent one of the most vivid modern examples of this dynamic. One of the most striking aspects of Trump's psychology is his communication style. Unlike many politicians who use formal policy language, Trump often speaks in simple, emotionally direct phrases. Psychologists refer to this as low linguistic complexity. At first glance, this may appear unsophisticated, but psychologically it can be extremely powerful. Simple language is easier for audiences to process. It reduces cognitive effort and increases emotional impact. Research in political psychology shows that clear, repetitive messaging often resonates more strongly with large audiences than detailed policy explanations. Trump also frequently uses repetition. Certain phrases appear again and again in speeches and interviews. Repetition works because of a cognitive phenomenon called the illusory truth effect, the tendency for repeated statements to feel more believable over time. Another important element of Trump's communication style is emotional framing. Rather than presenting issues purely as policy debates, he often frames them in terms of threat, pride, strength, or injustice. Emotionally charged communication activates the brain's limbic system, the part of the brain involved in fear, motivation, and reward. When political messages trigger strong emotions, they become more memorable. This helps explain why Trump's speeches frequently generate intense reactions, both positive and negative. But perhaps the most psychologically distinctive aspect of Trump's communication is his constant presence in media narratives. For decades, he has demonstrated an intuitive understanding of how modern media ecosystems work. Controversy generates attention. Attention drives headlines, and headlines keep a public figure at the center of national conversation. Whether admired or criticized, Trump has rarely been ignored. And from a psychological perspective, visibility itself can become a form of power. Understanding the psychology of Donald Trump also requires examining the psychology of his supporters and critics. Human beings are deeply social creatures. Our beliefs, identities, and political loyalties are often shaped by group belonging. One relevant concept in psychology is social identity theory, developed by Henri Tajfel. This theory suggests that people define themselves partly through membership in social groups. Political movements often strengthen group identity by emphasizing shared values and common threats. Trump's messaging frequently emphasizes themes of national identity, strength, and loyalty. For supporters, this framing can create a powerful sense of unity and belonging. For critics, the same messages may appear exclusionary or divisive. This psychological divide illustrates an important principle. The same leader can evoke very different psychological responses in different groups. Another factor is polarization. Modern media ecosystems tend to amplify extreme opinions. As a result, public figures often become symbols onto which people project broader hopes or fears. Trump's presidency occurred during a time of intense political polarization in the United States. This environment amplified both enthusiastic support and intense opposition. From a psychological perspective, polarization strengthens group loyalty while increasing distrust of opposing viewpoints. The result is a social environment where compromise becomes more difficult and emotions run high. Understanding this dynamic helps explain why discussions about Donald Trump often feel less like policy debates and more like identity conflicts. In the end, the psychology of Donald Trump cannot be separated from the broader psychology of leadership itself. Throughout history, societies have often gravitated toward leaders who project confidence, strength, and certainty. From ancient emperors to modern presidents, Leadership styles have ranged from collaborative to highly dominant. Trump represents a leadership style that psychologists sometimes describe as charismatic populism. Charismatic leaders rely heavily on personal connection with supporters rather than institutional authority. They communicate directly with audiences, often bypassing traditional political structures. This approach can create strong loyalty among followers, but it can also intensify conflict with established institutions and political opponents. Whether viewed positively or negatively, Trump's leadership style has undeniably reshaped modern political communication. Future historians and psychologists will likely study his influence for decades, not simply because of the policies of his presidency, but because of the psychological dynamics surrounding his rise to power. In many ways, Trump's story reflects a deeper truth about human nature. People seek leaders who reflect their hopes, fears, and identities. Politics, at its core, is not only about laws and institutions. It is about psychology. And the psychology of Donald Trump reminds us that leadership is not only about governing. It is about storytelling, perception, and the powerful forces that shape how societies choose those who lead them.